Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're going to talk about Canada today and what our future is like with Rosemary Thompson. She is the executive director of an organization called the Coalition for a Better Future for Canada, and this is an organization that's been around for just a short time. We're going to hear a little bit about how the organization got started, what they do, and a major report they came out with just a week or so ago that I read a really interesting article about. Rosemary Thompson, welcome to the show.
Yes, hi. How are you, Brian?
Very well. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say about, I think it was a report card on Canada that was actually referenced in media articles recently. So first of all, let me ask you, what do you think of our future? Is it bright? Is it dim? Is it cloudy? What do you think of our future?
Well, listen, I'm a great believer in Canada. I love this country more than anything, but I actually think that this country needs a long-term, very, focused approach to the economy. And I think that that's why we started the Coalition for a Better Future 18 months ago. As we came out of the pandemic, we really felt that Canada needed to focus very specifically on what kind of economy we want. One that is, of course, strong economically, one that is socially strong, inclusive, and one that is also meeting the kind of targets that we want to meet to hit net zero in 2050.
So you mentioned, environmental issues. You mentioned social issues. You mentioned inclusion issues. But you started out by saying this was about the economy. So what's economic about environment and social and inclusion issues?
Well, listen, we're at a turning point. I think every Canadian knows that. But Canadians are not getting wealthier right now, Brian. They're getting poorer. If you look at our GDP per capita numbers, which is really the mother of all metrics on our scorecard, we're actually going backwards right now. And we think that's a big issue. If you take a look at GDP per capita right now, we went from 49,000 a year ago to 47,900. So we went backwards. If we were to hit the Americans, we'd have to get up to 60,000 a year, which is a big jump if we were going to hit it by 2030. We want to reach that gap. We don't want Canadians to feel poorer. And we know that many of your listeners are feeling that way right now. They're feeling it because it's real. So that's why we put the coalition together. The thing about the economy, though, is that you can't address the economy without looking at inclusion issues, how women are doing, how minorities are doing, how Indigenous people are doing. And you can't look at the economy right now without looking at climate change, because that is the great question of our time. We believe that you can still grow the economy and accomplish the other things at the same time. And that's why we put this scorecard together of 21 metrics to measure where we are now and where we want to be by 2030.
So maybe we can come back to some of those 21 metrics in a minute, but why? Why are we doing such a lousy job? Why are we, I think you said 49,000 versus 60,000 in the United States? Why are we doing such a lousy job?
Well, I think we're complacent. I think that Canada has benefited from extraordinary resources for really as long as we've been around. We're a very young country. And I think that at different times in our history, we have had a very specific focus on the economy. At the Coalition, we talk about the free trade period when Mr. Mulroney was in office, when, they decided, along with the country, they had a great big debate in this country about what our relationship was going to be with our biggest trading partner. And they came up with free trade, and we did that. And that really defined our economy for the next, I'd say, 20 to 25 years. Then in the 90s, Mr. Chrétien and Mr. Martin decided they were going to slay the deficit. We had huge deficits in this country, and they decided they wanted to balance the books. That was a new way of thinking, but we needed to do it because we were, again, falling behind. And so they did that, and it set us up for another 20, 25 years. Well, we haven't had a great big conversation about the economy that we want since then. And we think we're due. It's absolutely time. We've had too many elections in this country where there've just been, five things on display in terms of issues. And we think the economy should be at the heart of the public policy agenda going forward. And that's why we put this coalition together.
Our most recent past Minister of Finance has written a book, and it's come out, and one of the biggest criticisms is he says that the current government doesn't have a growth agenda, it doesn't have a prosperity agenda, that there's been a lack of attention to growth and prosperity. Do you think that's a problem?
Well, I would say that this is Bill Morneau that you're talking about. I've read his book. I want to give some. Listen, it's not been easy to govern in the last number of years. I think Mr. Trudeau came in with more of a social agenda, and he has accomplished many things. Childcare is one of the big ones, and we give him credit for that. He's also been buffeted by some huge crises. COVID was a terrible crisis. Now we have the war in Ukraine. But what we're saying at the coalition is, sure, of course, you've got all kinds of issues that are hitting you as a government, but what you need is a fundamental long-term strategy for economic growth, which is exactly what Mr. Morneau is talking about. And we think if we have that long-term strategy, it could withstand all kinds of crises and also could withstand changes of government. We just think that this is not a partisan issue. The economy is not a partisan issue. We all want to do better. It doesn't matter whether you're an NDPer or a conservative or a liberal. We all want our kids to do better than we've done or do as well as we've done. And that's why we think we need a long-term strategy for this country, because right now we are going backwards.
Okay, you're saying it's not a partisan issue, but we've seen just recently different governments around the world taking very different strategies. The UK government back last fall tried to do a sort of a trickle-down economy with Prime Minister Truss, and it didn't last very long. The Republicans in the United States are really on a balance the budget kind of scenario and use the debt ceiling as a discipline to do that. And President Biden in the United States has gone, with the Inflation Reduction Act, with the chip strategy. The Economist magazine and the New York Times have been running series on that this is a fallback a couple decades to an industrial strategy, and they're almost trying to do what Japan did. So should we be doing an industrial strategy? Should we be cutting the deficit? Should we be supply side economics? Different strategies have worked in different countries, and it's been very partisan.
So different parties will have different ways of getting to the goal, right? So if the goal is economic growth, there may be different ways of getting there, but the long-term goal should be growth. We want growth that is inclusive and sustainable. So you can what we've done is we've set the goals. They're like KPIs. We're putting Canada on key performance metrics because we think that if we have goals, we actually might try and hit them. Different parties will have different ways of getting to those goals, but if we're going for the goal, we're going in the right direction. Talking about Mr. Biden, who's coming to Ottawa this week, by the way, it is the talk of the town right now, his Inflation Reduction Act, which is really his play to become the clean tech leader of the world. We have to pay attention to what Mr. Biden is doing because we are his next door neighbor. And we have a metric in our scorecard, which predates the Biden legislative agenda, which is the clean tech contribution to GDP. And right now, we would say that we would have to triple our contribution or our investment in that category in order to meet what the Americans are doing. So again, I have to say that the coalition was thinking along the right lines before Mr. Biden came through with his agenda. And I'm pretty sure it's going to be one of the things that Mr. Trudeau speaks to him about this week, because Canada, we have critical minerals. We have the know-how. We have the smarts. We are in, the automobile industry. If we want to be in the green automobile industry, we have to unleash our potential and invest in critical minerals and the supply chain for the batteries into the cars that are going to be the green cars of the future. You can see Prime Minister Trudeau really making a big play on that right now. We would say terrific, but there's much more to do, obviously. That's only one part of the solution to get to net zero in 2050.
So the two countries that are supposedly, or the three countries that are supposedly most relevant in the battery manufacturing business with critical minerals are China, Russia, and Canada. And, you take a look at this chip policy that Biden has put in place. He's not allowing people to use chips if they're produced in China. Like, it's just almost a complete, ban of chips from China. Chips from Taiwan are okay, but not chips from China. Some people have argued that China and Russia could hold us up in electrification, in electric batteries, in critical minerals, much the same way as Russia is holding up Central and Eastern Europe from from a gas standpoint, from an energy standpoint. And there's therefore real geopolitical reasons that we need to have batteries produced in Canada. And more importantly than the batteries produced, all of the resources mined, the critical minerals mined. Do you think we need a strategy comparable to the chip strategy for batteries in Canada?
Well, listen, we need a strategy. We need a strategy. Yes. If we look at critical minerals, it's fascinating. We have potential, but we don't have the mines right now, Brian. It's fascinating. We talk a lot about them, but we don't have them. If you talk to the Mining Association of Canada, which is one of the members of the coalition, I was speaking to them just a few months ago and saying, you must be so happy. The government never stops talking about mining. You are at, it's a big priority for them right now. And they said to me, Rosemary, it's great that they're talking about us, but the reality is it takes up to 15 years to get a mine approved and start to be built in Canada. The approval process is so difficult in this country and so uncertain that it's hard to attract international investment to build the mines, to create, to mine the critical minerals that will go into this supply chain. So the reality is we talk a big game right now on this, but in terms of execution, it's very, very difficult. So again, correct to your point. We need a strategy. If this is of national importance, if this is one of the lanes that we're going to pick for our new economy, then we have to say this is a project in the national interest. We need to get this done.
I think we've been talking about, or I've been hearing about the Ring of Fire my whole adult life. And I'm not sure if we've done anything.
Never happened. Never happened. Correct. So, they haven't got the approval for the Ring of Fire. They don't even have the approval for the road that you need to build to get to the Ring of Fire. Think about it. Not even the road.
Not even the road.
It's a problem. It's a problem. Now, if you talk about Ring of Fire, and this is something I hope will come through in the budget as well, is that, and at our conference a week ago,
Rosemary, let me interrupt. I apologize. Let's come back to your conference in the Ring of Fire in just 2 minutes. We're going to take a break for some messages and be back in just 2 minutes with Rosemary Thompson, the Executive Director of the Coalition for a Better Future. Stay with us, everyone. We'll be back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're talking about Canada and what it takes to have a focus on the economy and a growth agenda. Our guest tonight is Rosemary Thompson. She is the Executive Director of the Coalition for a Better Future. This coalition has been around for 18 months. We're going to hear a little bit about where it came from and what its objective is, as well as a major report that they issued recently that I think I'm very interested in hearing about. But I got to tell you, just as a little bit of background to everybody, that Rosemary Thompson's got really quite a fascinating background. I'm not going to talk about her academic background yet, but she was a researcher with the PBS NewsHour, the McNair-Lehrer NewsHour in the 1980s. When I lived in the United States, I probably listened to you. And so that's kind of interesting. Then you were a broadcast journal for 8 years with CBC. Then you were the Montreal bureau chief, and then the Washington correspondent, and then the deputy bureau chief for CTV National News, for CTV News, and you worked there for almost 15 years. And then you were the executive director of communications, public affairs, and corporate secretary for the National Arts Center. I had the privilege for numerous years of going to events in your center, and so they were really quite enjoyable. And thank you for the role that you played there. You were then the vice president of marketing and development for the Banff Center for Arts and Creativity for 3 years, and then the vice president public affairs and marketing for the National Gallery of Canada, and then the executive director for the Coalition of the Better Future. What a fascinating career you've had.
Thank you, Brian. It's been an honor. I think, listen, a lot of people said, why did I was in public affairs and politics and journalism for 22 years. And of course, I covered the story of Canada for those 22 years. It was amazing. I loved it, all that journalism. And then I went into the arts for just over a decade, and that was good for my soul. And then 18 months ago, I thought I was concerned about the country. And I was working at the gallery, and a friend of mine had just started the coalition, and it was being co-chaired by Anne McClellan and Lisa Raitt. Anne McClellan being the former deputy leader of the Liberal Party, and Lisa Raitt being the former deputy leader of the Conservative Party. So a bipartisan project. And I called the person that had started this, and I said, what's going on? And tell me all about it. And he said, Rosemary, I've started this thing and it's taking off, and I need somebody to run it. Would you run it? And so I thought about it, and I thought, I just think it's the right moment. I just think Canada needs this right now. I think we need Anne McClellan and Lisa Raitt, driving this agenda. And I really believed that it was time. And so here I am. And it's really been very rewarding talking to, we have 142 organizations that have joined this now. Everybody from the Red Cross to Imagine Canada, to the Mining Association of Canada, the Business Council of Canada, the Chambers of Commerce of Canada. It's very broad-based, but it's not for profit and the private sector coming together to say, we want Canada to do better.
Well, I congratulate you on that, but I also question whether people really do want this, at least our political parties. Do they want this? I've also interviewed some people from an organization called Centerized Canadians, which argued that they similarly believed there was this need for people in the center. But a lot of people think that the Conservative Party, with our current leader of the Conservative Party, the leader of the official opposition, have become very right-wing and extremist. And the current government under Justin Trudeau, with its coalition or its agreement with the New Democratic Party, have moved to the left. And so therefore, there's this big glaring hole in the middle, the center of Canadian politics. But if that's where the parties are going, does that mean, frankly, that's where the people want them to go?
Well, we would say that the vast majority of Canadians are in the middle. We believe they are in the middle. And that's why we created the coalition with a Conservative and a Liberal coming together on an economic agenda for the country. There's always been great discussion in this country about the silent majority. Well, the silent majority is in the middle, and elections are decided by the folks that sit in the middle politically. There's always a swing vote that goes either way. It's usually 20 to 30% of the population moves left or right, and those are the people that decide these elections. We also believe that Canadians are a very pragmatic people. We like it when things are going well. We like it when things are well run. The polls and the studies show us that Canadians like it when different levels of government actually work together and don't fight with each other.
Yeah, but then the vast majority of times people will elect a different party federally than they elect provincially, which almost seems the opposite of what you're saying, is that we like friction. And frankly, some people think minority governments work better than majority governments. And so therefore there's some friction, or at least need for collaboration, that people are forcing upon us.
The thing about our organization, which we like, is that this proposal that we've put together, these 21 metrics and goals for 2030, we don't really mind who takes them and runs with them. We want somebody to do it because we believe this is the agenda for the country right now.
Okay, so tell us about some of these 21 metrics, if you could. You don't have to tell them all, but just some of them.
No, just some highlights. So it's basically for the audience, because it's maybe a little bit difficult to understand. But key performance metrics are what a lot of organizations use to measure how you're doing. And so we think that Canada needs this. And so one section of our scorecard is called Living Better. So how can we live better as a country? So one of our metrics is median income from wages, salaries, and commissions. So what's the average income for Canadians right now? Brian, I want you to guess. What do you think the average Canadian earns right now?
$35,000.
Okay, a little bit higher. All right. We went from 39,000 last year to 38,000 this year. We declined. We earned a little bit less. Your 2030 goal is 48,600. Again, we want to hit the Americans. That's a long way to go, Brian. In less than 10 years, we want a $10,000 increase in median income.
Well, and from what I understand, please correct me if I'm wrong, there's been no real increases in median income in something like a decade.
Well, it's been very flat. And so we believe that it's time that number starts to change. Now,
so how can you possibly have a 33, you're going to go from 38 to 48 in a decade? How are you possibly going to do a 1/3, a 30?
Well, we've pegged it based on international comparators. based on how we compare with other G7 countries
And this
around
is
the
real,
world.
not nominal, not inflation. This is real increase.
Yeah, we want a real increase. Now, is it going to be difficult? Sure, but
Big time.
if any political party or any country said this is the issue for our country, wow, I bet you'd start to see the numbers move. We know that would happen if there was a laser focus on even that single metric. Whoa, it's a big thing to measure yourself against, but we believe it's important in order to stay with other countries that are in the same cohort that we're in. We believe we need to have a similar standard of living to the G7. And it's important for us to stay up with our friends and our allies. So that's our one metric, just one metric.
But let's stay on that for a second. So you said we have to stay up with our friends. My understanding is that a lot of the G7 has not similarly had an increase in median real incomes. The U.S. has, China, India have certainly had, but Britain, France, Germany have not. And so what is the secret?
We think the secret is a number of things. First of all, we have to start to invest in the growth in our economy. Now, in our metrics, we also looked at different industries that seem to show some hope or really seem to show a lot of growth. And there are metrics in our economic metrics, our narwhals, as we call them. These are companies that are scaling to a valuation of $1 billion or more. So this is sort of exciting stuff that's happening. So we're seeing growth in the health sciences. Things like biotech is doing really, really well. We're seeing it in agriculture. We're seeing it in clean tech. We're seeing it in fintech. We're seeing it. Tech is actually doing extremely well. So if there was a concerted effort to say, okay, Canada we're not going to change overnight. We have to take the things that we've done well with in the past, but we have to start to move the economy and start to pick some lanes that will show some real growth potential for our kids, for things that they can do in the future. So that's one way.
Okay, so
that is one way.
Let's talk about tech for just a couple of minutes. So I've interviewed numerous different leaders of small venture capital companies or companies that are attracting VC capital over the course of the last couple of weeks from a couple of pitch nights that I've attended in downtown Toronto. And every single one of them has complained about how difficult it is to raise money in the Canadian marketplace, and it's far easier to raise money in the United States. That if you grow anywhere close to $100 million to get to that billion, you've got to go to the United States. You got to get listed on NASDAQ, or you got to go to Silicon Valley to get VC money, et cetera. That the SPACs in the United States and the VCs and other other ways of getting money in the United States are far better than in Canada. That Canadians tend to be very risk averse. And that therefore you can start in Canada, and you can therefore be creative in Canada, but to really have innovation and scale, you got to go to the United States.
Right. Well, I've spoken to similar people. We actually wanted one person to come. He's the CEO of Ascent, which is a fantastic company in Ottawa. Actually, they actually track supply chain through software. Anyway, software development, and he's one of these superstar companies that is becoming one of our narwhals. Anyway, we had a conversation about it, and I said, what are you doing and where are you going? And he was in Phoenix when he spoke to me. And it was exactly to your point. He has to go to the United States to raise the capital to grow his company. And I said to him, okay, well, why have you stayed in Canada? Why? And he, it was kind of an emotional response. He said, well, I'm Canadian and I have family here and I believe in this country. And so if I have to go to the States to raise the money, I'll raise the money. I think for us, though, in this conversation is we need to make it easier. We need to pick some lanes, and we need to say these things. The thing about Canadians, and it's one of the things that I love about Canadians, we like to be nice to everybody. So we love everybody. We want to sprinkle little money everywhere across the country. But many of these entrepreneurs are saying to us, it would be great if Canada could actually place some bets, either on companies or industries that it believes that can really grow. We had another guy who was at our first summit. He's one of the original founders of Moderna. Moderna. Wow, what a story. So, Canadian scientist wanted to build a biotech company, and he ended up going where? Boston. and he built Moderna with partners in Boston. So, of course, that is now a US-based company that was founded by a Canadian who lives in the United States. So, yes, to your point, it could have been a Canadian success story if he could have scaled that company in this country. I asked him why. Why did you go? He found it really difficult to get the money that he needed to just get his lab going right at the very beginning. He was going to get little pieces of money from here and there in Canada. It was just not enough. And so he went down to the States, and in Boston, there is lots of capital to put these labs together. And that's why Moderna's in Boston.
So if you want to grow the biotech or the green tech or the fintech business in Canada, what do you need to do? What do we need to do?
Well, what he said to us was that the Canadian government needs to place some bets. It shouldn't be sprinkling money everywhere across the country. Should actually say, okay, here's a company that we really think is exciting. Let's try and scale it. Or a cluster of companies that are in the same space. Let's see if we can build this and make it happen. Now, they may, by doing it that way, create some unhappiness in competitive sectors or other sectors. But this CEO said to us that he thought that would be the way to go.
So I disagree with you. I don't think your government does a good job of picking winners. In fact, too often they pick losers, or, if some of the rumors are told, too often they pick ones that they're connected with because they donated to their party or something like that. And so therefore.
Yeah, well, that's not a good thing. You're right.
But I do think that flow-through shares might be a solution. The flow-through shares in the mineral business work extremely well and are very attractive to investors, such that if you know that you're going to get a third or something of your investment back, even if the company is not successful, so that you decrease your risk, and they go out and they spend money on developing and exploring, I think that makes sense. I don't understand why our tax system is that you can only deduct expenses when you're making profit. Why can't you deduct expenses when you're making losses for a while? And then you'll make, even more taxation money if and when the company is profitable. So I think that's one. The IRAP program that gives some scientific spending, some reimbursement from the federal government, I think is a good idea, but the administration around it is just abysmal. It takes forever to get those kinds of monies back. And then I think finally, the other thing that I would do is I think that the programs that the TSX has to launch public venture capital companies are almost the examples that SPACs used in the United States, but they weren't allowed to grow big enough. In Canada, they're a couple $1 million, maybe $50 million. In the United States, they're a couple $100 million. And so therefore allowing those CPC companies to grow in size and become public venture capital companies attractively, I think makes a ton of sense. So those are 3 suggestions for you.
Well, these are all great suggestions. I mean, many talk about the tax system. It's not actually in our scorecard, but we do talk about private investment as well. We don't think this is all just on the government's back. The government can't possibly do this on its own. We think we need to see more private sector, private investment. And we actually have one of our metrics is exactly that. How much are we investing in R&D as a country? And again, not enough private investment in research and development. So how do we unleash that capital? We know that there's money there, but for some reason it's not being invested. And so that is a big, big question to unlock.
So the United States, Biden in his most recent programs have put effectively a tax on share buybacks to try to spur R&D investment. One of the big criticisms about a lot of the oil and gas companies out west in Canada that have enjoyed, huge profits after the increase in oil prices because of the Russian invasion of Ukraine is that they've been spending most of their money on share buybacks and paying down debt. Should there be something that disincentivizes them to return money to shareholders and tries to get them to spend it on R&D and exploration?
So we don't have all of the answers. I'm not saying that we're soothsayers. What we are saying is that we're measuring we haven't had an organization in this country that has done a comprehensive look and measurement of what's going on in the Canadian economy year in, year out. And that's what we've decided to do from now until 2030. And so what we can do is measure, okay, how are we measuring up against the Americans and against the world in terms of private investment in R&D? Well, right now I can tell you we're not measuring up well. So we've identified the problem, and then it's up to the policymakers to figure out what is the solution to this. We have lots of it can come from the private sector as much as it can come from the public sector.
Okay, so median real per capita income is one. Private investment in R&D is another. What's another one of your metrics?
Well, racial wage gap. I thought this one was fascinating, and I hadn't seen this statistic before. So it turns out that racialized Canadians are earning 82 cents on the dollar versus non-racialized Canadians. So that was something new for us. We didn't realize that. And so again, wow, interesting, right? And so it's time we need to work on that. That was one of our ones in Living Better. And that speaks also to immigration. We need immigration to keep our labor force going. We have a lot of jobs that are open right now in the country. And so if immigrants are coming to this country, they need to know that they're going to earn a fair and decent wage, that they can live in a housing that's not going to be so expensive that they can't afford it, that they can get their kids educated, that they can find a family doctor. I mean, the whole immigration story is fascinating. And anyway, that metric, I think, speaks very much to that question. Another one is, we love this one. Share of youth not in education, employment, or training. So we're talking about young people that are not in school, not working, and not apprenticing. So they're the ones that are falling through the cracks. And so we have that as a number. And right now it's 13%, which is, interesting. We'd like to get it down to 6%. We want to see as much full employment and, either they're in school, training, or working, right? And so we'd like to see that number fall in half so that we see more and more young people in the workforce.
And when you pick this metric, how are you picking the 6? Is it based on international comparables? Is it just half of what it is today? Like, how do you justify your KPI?
So we look at the OECD, and that's how we balance it out to see where we think we should land, and something that's also possible, right? Like, we don't want these metrics to be impossible to reach. And so we're looking at our OECD, comparators and hoping that we'll land in a better place.
We're chatting tonight with Rosemary Thompson. She's the CEO of a coalition for a better Canada. We're going to take a break for some messages and be back in just 2 minutes with Rosemary. And we're going to talk a little bit more about some of these metrics. I'm going to try to challenge her a little bit more because this is kind of fun, seeing what we're doing and how we're doing. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. It's my real pleasure tonight to welcome Rosemary Thompson. She is the CEO of an organization called A Coalition for a Better Future for Canada. And we've been talking about the different metrics, KPIs that they have, that they've been analyzing to try to figure out whether what the metrics should be for Canada to be better in the future. Rosemary, just a little while ago, you posted that our data shows women have not made any progress in terms of representation in decision-making positions since 2016. That sounds pretty bad.
Well, it's not great. So that's share of women in senior management positions. So it was 29% in 2020, and it's gone actually to 31%. So it's had a small incremental increase, which is good. We'd like to get to 50%. So, Brian, this one is an interesting one because Anne McClellan and Lisa Raitt, who are the co-chairs of the coalition, really believed that number would have gone up quite substantially since we started measuring, just because there's been such a policy focus on this. My goodness, it's been a big issue for the last, I'd say, certainly 10 years, and certainly through Mr. Trudeau's mandate. Well, the reality is we're basically stuck, right? We're stuck at around 29, 30, and we're not breaking through the so-called glass ceiling. So why is that? Oh, Who knows? I mean, I think COVID has been terrible. And I think that, people are making decisions about whether they even want to be in senior management based on all of the things they're trying to balance right now. But we still think that it would be great to see a larger share of women in decision-making positions.
So our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, in his, I think, when was it? Back in 2015, had a 50-50 female-male representation in cabinet. And when asked why, he said it's 2015 or something like that was his line. Are quota systems the right way to achieve what you're looking for?
I think we're looking for quota systems. I think it's just about, well, I think there's a whole bunch of things. I think there's tons of qualified women that could do this. I think it takes senior management teams to make a decision that they're going to do this. We know that in the private sector that boards have become much more representative. So that's awesome, but it's just not happening across the board. And so we believe, yes, you have to have a concerted effort to make this happen. There's no question, but we don't talk about quotas at the coalition. We just think it should be done based on merit. I mean, women have been in the workforce for many, 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 many decades, and there are tons of qualified women. We know that women are doing very well in the university system. So when you look at the pipeline of qualified applicants or qualified women coming up through, from college to university into the workforce and up through these different companies, we know that there are qualified people. Sometimes it takes mentorship. Sometimes it just takes somebody to take the hand and haul the person up. So we'd love to see a lot more of this.
Friday, I interviewed a HR expert that said it got even worse during COVID for numerous different reasons. Number one, that too much of the home care, education, et cetera, fell on females during the pandemic when we were all sequestered back in our homes. But then also he said that numerous females actually liked it. And it's a thing called either the Great Resignation or the Great Breakup, where females in droves, according to him, and some reports from McKinsey and the Wall Street Journal and places like that, have suggested that there's a lot of females that are choosing to actually either work in a gig economy or work out of home because they don't want to go back to the corporate grind. Is that a problem in you achieving your objective?
So I would say, I think it's quite astute what your guest said. I think that a lot of people we were out of the office for on and off for 2 years, or some people 3 years. I mean, yeah. And you had little kids on Zoom calls and, trying to have, homeschool beside you on the desk while you're doing the Zoom call. Like, it was a bit insane, let's face it. And I think there was a point where people just had it, like, enough already, right? So how are we going to we've had a setback. There's no question in terms of women's participation in senior management roles. How do we get them back? Well, we've got to make the workplace conducive for women, right? But not just women, dads, moms, everybody. Maybe we don't want the grind quite the way we have. We can still be extremely productive. We know we were during COVID, but how do we create the flexibility and sort of the welcome, inclusive nature of the workplace, whether it's, hardcore corporate or I think it can be done. I think it can be done, but we need to be very deliberate about it.
I interviewed an economist yesterday, Rosemary, that said that the problem is low interest rates historically that led to this huge asset price inflation that meant that we pay twice as much on a per capita basis for our housing as the Americans do, and that we've got twice as much debt as the Americans do. And so therefore that extra amount of money that we have to pay that we end up having in debt ends up taking away from our abilities to do a lot of other things. And it crowds out the potential investment in and innovative entrepreneurial spirit in more productive areas of the economy. And he would put it right on central banks and governments and say that's the problem, is that these low interest rates for too long led to this asset price inflation, primarily properties, and took people out of the creative, innovative productive parts of the economy into just becoming apartment flippers. What do you think of that?
Well, fascinating. Well, it's definitely a factor in the Canadian economy right now. It is. And it's an issue that we have to deal with. There's no question. Lisa talks about, she has two sons. She has a son in university, one who's about to go to university, and they're both studying pretty, difficult subjects. And her big concern now is that one or both of them will move to the United States because they can look at what housing costs in the US versus here. So why would they stay in Canada? Again, this is a big problem for this country because we need our young people to drive the economy for the future of Canada. So, we have work to do. I don't think it's impossible, though. I really don't. I mean, this is why we put this thing together and why we've, it's a very clear scorecard. It's 21 metrics. We know that the solutions might be complex, but if we focus on all of these issues, we do believe we'll make some progress. And we can give young people hope.
Are interest rates or inflation part of those metrics?
No, it's not one of our metrics. So, this was done 18 months ago, and it was before we were talking about the housing crisis. So at the moment, the scorecard is the scorecard. I'm not sure whether we're going to change it or not, but we have done research on the attitude of young people, and that is fascinating. So we did a poll that was published at our conference 10 days ago, and it showed that in terms of where the economy is going, the most pessimistic cohort were young people, 18 to 35. And it's the first time that generation, generally that generation is the most optimistic generation because they're coming out of school, they don't have too much debt, hopefully, they're just starting their first job. They believe the future is bright. Right now, that cohort is the most pessimistic generation. I think that's a huge issue in this country. And it's part of the reason why we're doing a campus tour. So Anne and Lisa have been going across the country and visiting university campuses. And we actually have economics students that are taking the scorecard and trying to do it for their region. We were in New Brunswick at the University of New Brunswick in Fredericton, and the economics department there did the New Brunswick scorecard. And it was amazing. It was young people saying, okay, how are we doing in New Brunswick? So we would love to see more of that. Because we think if that generation decides to drive this conversation, it's going to be much, much better for them and for us.
Why are young people so pessimistic?
I think because it's tough out there right now. They graduate from school, they're getting into the workforce, but they're finding it difficult to afford housing. If you're living in some of the big cities in this country, it's very expensive. I know that reading a story recently of Mr. Trudeau going to visit young nurses, and the young nurse was saying, well, I'm enjoying being a nurse, but I'm finding it difficult to even pay for the food that I need. I don't want to go to the food bank, but these are the things that some young people are looking at. This is nuts. These are professional young people who have graduated from university that are finding it difficult to pay the rent, difficult to put food on the table because of just generally the cost of living. Now, let's hope inflation is starting to decrease. That's a good thing, but we still have a long way to go to create hope for that generation.
So you probably saw the statistics in the paper just this morning that suggested that we're the first generation in history to spend more on people over the age of 65 than on people under the age of 18, and it's getting worse. Is that part of the problem? Is that we just spend so much money on healthcare and pensions and long-term care, and not enough on education and opportunities for young people?
Well, this is the demographic question, right? Boom, bust, or echo, right? We are hitting it right now, and that is the reason this is not going away. This question, because more and more of the boomers are, if they haven't retired, many of them have retired, and there are going to be more and more and more of them that are retiring. And so it's this massive generation that's at the top, and then this much smaller generation at the bottom that has to support the costs of this, big generation, post-World War II generation. So listen, Brian, there are many great questions right now, right? The demographic one is a huge one. Climate change is another one. And economic growth to support all of this is really the foundation of it all. If we don't have growth, how how in anyone's imagination are we going to be able to support the social programs that we're going to need in the future? We need growth very badly,
but to get
and that's
growth,
what we're focused on it.
To get growth on a per capita basis, growth absolutely we can get by immigration, and we are going to accept something like 400,000 new immigrants a year, and so we are going to get absolute growth just by way of expanding our size. But to get growth on a per capita basis, you have to have increases in productivity, and we have not had any increases in productivity. So how do we do that? How do we get that?
Well, we think that it's going to be through investments in research and development so that each of us individually are producing more, right? So whatever we're producing is of more value than it is today. So that's one way of doing it. R&D, innovation that way can make each of us more productive. The other thing that we can do is look at lifelong learning. So skilling and upskilling, that's a big question for human resource people and for people that are running large organizations. How do you keep people in the workforce as long as you can and keep them as productive as you can? Well, you have to give them some training, some upskilling, some reskilling in order to make them the most productive person that they can be in your company or your organization. So those are two solutions.
We're chatting tonight with Rosemary Thompson. She is the head of a coalition that is working for the betterment of Canada, and they've got 20 different metrics that they evaluate on whether we're doing a good or a bad job in Canada. We're going to take a final break and come back in just 2 minutes for some concluding comments. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Rosemary Thompson. She's the executive director of the Coalition for a Better Future for Canada. And it's been an interesting conversation about the metrics that she's got and the report that she came out with just a couple of weeks ago in regards to how Canada is doing and how the Coalition for a Better Future thinks we need to focus on these metrics, these key performance indicators to ensure that we actually achieve a better future. Rosemary, if people want to check out your website and read this report, do you have a place where they can go?
Yes, please go to www.canadacoalition.ca. And, the report has just been published. It's only a couple of weeks old. And it's very understandable. This is not, this is not going to be difficult for any person to read and understand. And it's very simple in a way, simple and complex at the same time. It's 21 metrics for a better future. If we were to follow this as goals for 2030, if we had a laser focus on economic growth that is inclusive and sustainable, we believe we'll get somewhere. It takes a whole of society approach, but if the public, the great middle, as you and I have just been speaking about, the silent majority, were to say to governments, every government, municipal, provincial, federal, private sectors, civil society, this is the question for this country, we believe that Canada will start to move in the right direction.
Rosemary, I hope you're right, but I worry that you're not. I'm a political junkie, probably somewhat like yourself. And in the last couple of political campaigns, federal and provincial, frankly, there's not been much of a focus on growth or prosperity. There's been a focus on pharmacare and on dental care and childcare and the environment. And then, criticisms of abortion attitudes and gun attitudes, and we've had snitch lines. We've had a whole bunch of things on both sides of the House that have been, I don't know whether you call them culture wars like they have they call them in the United States, or just partisan, wrangling. But it hasn't been a lot of focus on the economy. And frankly, 2 election cycles ago, the only one in the leadership debate that was really talking about growth was Maxime Bernier, and he was from a very far right political party. There was no one talking about it. And you referenced earlier, Chrétien and Martin, who had focused on deficit reduction at one point in time, and you also mentioned Brian Mulroney, who talked about free trade. Both of those were about the economy and growth. There's an interesting theory that's been talked about a lot in the last little while that you're probably aware of, called fiscal economics. And it's criticizing Keynesian economics that's all about deficit financing during tough times, and monetarist that's all about controlling of the money supply. And its argument is that really, inflation is the market's bet on whether governments can control themselves. And it's interesting that what they're saying is that, even though the monitors thought that the low interest rates in the last 10 years were going to lead to inflation, it didn't, because deficits were still reasonable. But in the last couple of years, where deficits have ballooned because of the pandemic and things like the Inflation Reduction Act in the United States and a lot of the things that's going on in Canada, governments are no longer believing. The market's no longer believing that government can control itself, and that therefore deficit control should be one of the major issues. And you've seen numerous economists that have put pressure on Chrystia Freeland, our Minister of Finance, to bring the deficit under control. Is that one of your metrics? Should it be? Is that one of the keys? Is that we need a government that's more like Mulroney or Chrétien Martin?
We believe that it's important to have a strong balance sheet for a whole bunch of reasons. Number one, to pay for the social programs that we've all, come to love and enjoy that are creaking right now. We can see the cracks in healthcare. We also need a strong balance sheet to deal with a very unstable geopolitical situation that we find ourselves in right now. It's very important that we're able to finance the types of things we're going to need to do in this new geopolitical context. So yes, it's that deficits and looking at our overall spending is important. But even more important to the coalition is this concept of growth. And it's not complicated. It's just to say we need to grow again. And when you talk about the culture wars, it's fascinating. I covered 7 election campaigns and 2 referendums when I was a journalist. And the culture wars were always on the sides. And to be honest, they're almost a way to distract the population away from what the tough issues are. The tough issue before us right now is to bring the economy back, to see some growth again, growth that's inclusive and sustainable, so that Canadians start to feel that their own livelihoods are better and that their kids are going to do well. And I think that will create all kinds of unity in our country. That's another reason why we did this. We believe we need a unifying project, and we believe the economy is the thing that can bring us all together.
Well, I think growth, prosperity, productivity are the keys to success. And so I congratulate you on your efforts and look forward to your achievements. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Take care.
That's our show for tonight, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Brian Crombie, Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online, even from Ottawa, at www.saga960am.ca. All my podcasts and videocasts are available after the fact on briancrombie.com, on YouTube, on LinkedIn, on Instagram, on Facebook, on Apple Podcasts, Audible Podcasts, and Amazon Podcasts. Have a great evening, everybody. Rosemary, thank you. Good night.